Yeah. So Matt, tell us, related to Chandler from Friends?
Yes, I get a bit of that. Every now and then I go to places and someone goes, "Oh my goodness, you're Matthew Perry."
Kia ora, Gateway. Welcome to this week's episode of Sunday Lunch.
It's great to have you with us. Each week we debrief Sunday's sermon with the speaker to offer practical sermon application for your week.
So settle in, because this is Sunday Lunch. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Lunch. This morning we are sitting down with Matt Perry. Matt is on our leadership team and we're really excited to be sitting down with him today. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, thank you.
Good morning. It's good to have you with us. And that we are socially distanced. Even though you can't see, we are masked up and socially distant, and it's going to be a good conversation. So, Matthew Perry, not of Friends fame, but
it is kind of my era. It really is, actually. We're about the same age. And
really?
Yeah, so obviously we're talking about the TV series
yes,
Friends.
TV show Friends. Yeah.
And, well, actually, I think he's a year older than me. And I went home to my parents' house in the 90s for a normal visit one day, and I looked on the fridge, and there was a cutout from the newspaper, and it said, "Matthew Perry crashes his Porsche in a cocaine stupor." And my mother had ripped it out of the newspaper because the original, the other Matthew Perry.
Why was it on the fridge?
Because she just liked to see my name in writing.
Your name in writing. And now, here's the thing. Your name has been in writing now a fair bit, because you've had quite an illustrious career of many different things over the years. But let's do a who, what, where, when, how of your life and what's led you up to this point, starting from wherever you'd like to start, and just kind of let the people know who, what, when, where, how is Matt Perry.
Sure. Well, look, that's far too much. But I born and raised in Wellington, a lovely Church of England family. Met a lovely girl in 7th form, which is year 13, who was captivating and completely different to anybody else. You know how it goes. And I chased her all around Wellington for a wee while. And when I stopped and caught up with her, I realised that I was a Baptist. So she was at a Baptist church, and the next thing you know, I'm under the most amazing teaching and experiencing God in a way that I hadn't before. And so from that, that season of my life, that age of 17, 18, I really encountered a personal relationship with God and with Andrea.
Oh, this was Andrea. Okay,
yeah, it was
great.
Andrea. Yes, I'm very pleased to say that we went on and we're married a few years later. So yeah, Wellington and the mid 80s and Wimber conferences and the charismatic renewal latter phases and just a lot of fun and a lot of new experiences. And I was working in advertising at the time, so marketing and promotion and that kind of thing. Yeah, and then what?
So when did you get involved with Radio Rema?
It was at that time, soon after we were married in the early 90s. Yep, I went from an ad agency to Radio Rema in Wellington when they had stations all around the country, and they were looking to grow and expand and break out so that each region or big city would do its own recording and its own break-in for breakfast. So I went on board then, actually just for a couple of years. It was sort of just a season, but it was a good season of building studio, training in radio, doing some leadership training and some broadcasting training down in Christchurch, where it used to be the head office for Rema, and then during that time at Rema, where we were sort of, I guess, more. That was at my first Christian ministry full time as a 20-something. That's when Andrea and I started to get an urge towards missions and the world and nations and looking way beyond New Zealand and that kind of thing. So yeah.
So what kind of was the first inkling of the heart toward the mission field, and which is a huge part of your life?
Yes.
And sort of, I would guess, ministry career, to put it in those kind of words,
yes.
Like where did that sort of first heart pull come from?
Yeah, look, the thing is, it came from leadership at that church, and those, as a latter teen and an early 20, the leadership, 4 of the elders at this Baptist church that we were in were returned missionaries from India and Africa. And so everything that we were experiencing in terms of teaching and Christian life and so on had a bit of a mission, a global global context and a global background, and a lot of so stories from India and Africa and stories of other peoples and language groups and this kind of stuff. That was our discipleship, and so that really shaped the way we thought about the world. That shaped our worldview, our growing worldview, which was the world is made up of many, many, many language groups and peoples and ethnically different groups. And then as we read the Bible and as we were, growing and inhaling the teaching and the Word of God and this wonderful new life, things like all nations and the nations would jump out from Scripture because that's what we were getting in our church life. And so it really grew from there. Then I read a book. I remember reading a book called Catch the Vision 2000. So that's obviously last century. And it was a big book at the time, and it was basically about the mandate on the church to reach out and bless nations. And there was a bit of a thing last century about let's do it by the year 2000. And for what it's worth, it was a good mobilizer. And that book helped me again. It was just one of those. It's a typical story of things along the way that just push you in a certain direction, and in partnership with what God is doing in your head and in your heart. It built into essentially a call overseas.
Obviously, being through these different eras of ministry and it being a huge part of your life, have you noticed sort of trends with missions, quote unquote, and things like that?
Yeah, sure. And I think that is normal, reasonable seasons of life and of the church and of the thinking of the global church. Absolutely. I mean, in the 80s and so on, in the early 90s, definitely there was a push. There was the movements like AD 2000 and beyond, and whether, obviously, all the people groups of the earth weren't blessed with a church by the year 2000, but it gave great impetus and great mobility to churches and studies and scholars and practitioners. And there were articles at the time of, well, do we miss the boat? Not at all. It spurred us along towards love and good deeds. It was a good thing. And yes, definitely into the 21st century, things were reorganized. But a lot of those groups have reorganized themselves to train, leadership training, sending, and all sorts of ministries have continued with that emphasis among the nations. But I think you're right. It depends on the season and what sort of group your head is in too. Yes. Some churches, some denominations, some groups are full on about reaching the nations, and others it comes and goes as an emphasis depending on the people and the leadership and all sorts of things. This is I think it's part of the beautiful mystery of God, and He's quite capable of pulling it all together at the right time.
And for those of us that know your story, that passion for missions really went to the next step because you did move overseas for some time. You and your family moved to Jordan for a season. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, Andrea and I, when we were at a phase, early married, a couple of years in, thinking what should we do with our lives, and at that stage, we were focused on, the OE, the big Kiwi OE. Let's get out of here. Let's go and see the world. And so we genuinely were thinking, let's go to Europe. Let's get jobs over in England. Let's buy a Eurail pass and let's see, the Northern Hemisphere. And as devoted young Christians, we were praying about this, and I really believe God took that zeal and that interest in the nations and the world and combined it with that theology that I was just talking about. And before long, we were basically feeling a longing towards unreached peoples rather than, London lifestyle. And so we were thinking more and more about going somewhere and serving in a way that would bless peoples and work amongst people who have little opportunity to know about Jesus. So that meant Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and communists and other people groups and people in other nations like that. So then as we started to share that with our leadership, who were these returned missionary types, they were like, just get some training, learn, get deep into the Bible and into theology and into anthropology and humanity and peoples and prepare yourselves, because they could see that this was a life. And so we did. We went to a missionary training college in Australia, which was a wonderful Bible college run by WEC, Worldwide Evangelization for Christ, the mission that we ended up joining. And that gave us great foundations, great biblical and cultural foundations. And basically, as we continued to pray and think and talk together, our hearts were not for Europe in the end, even though that's legit. Our hearts were for the Arab peoples of the Middle East, and there's a lot of them, but yeah, for the Arab world. And so that's where we ended up going after we finished from Bible college.
How did you feel the Lord confirmed, or did you feel like he confirmed? Was it just a, hey, this is what we want to do, we're going to go here and trust that God's with us? Or how was that process of deciding where to go and that this was what you were going to do?
Yeah, great question, Stephen, great question. It was about timing and prayer and, conversation together, Andrea and I, and people we trusted and loved and looked up to. And that was the very question that we were asking ourselves: Is this just us? Is this just us? I want to go to Bible college. I want to train. I want to prepare. I want to give my life to live in a very different place. And I've had the urge and to speak with people about Jesus. I'm not a very good evangelist, but that desire in my heart to be part of their journey towards knowing God was deep in me. And what I realized, and I learned, I don't know where I read it or what it was, or someone, was that a call, this was the definition of call. This is how I realized that it wasn't just us. There were two things. One, someone described a call and they said it's an urge and a desire in your heart that grows and grows until it gets to a point where following it becomes an issue of obedience or disobedience. An urge that grows and grows. And that's what we had. So we're talking 18 months, 2 years of yes, I think this is good, I think it's good, and it stayed in our hearts, and it stayed in us together as a couple, which is very important. And so then it was Bible college and beyond, and missionary training college and beyond. But then there was another thing which was beautifully biblical, which I fall back on a lot. Psalm 37. I was reading a study or something on Psalm 37, and it says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." And it was one of those lovely passages that you write and you see it on the walls, and it's a popular one. And I read a study and delved into it, and I realized for the first time in my young Christian life that it wasn't what I had thought. What I had thought was it meant if I delight myself in the Lord, He will give me what I want, kind of, without being too crass. But that was how I saw that passage. And then I remember the moment I realized it isn't that. It is delight yourself in the Lord, and He will put His desires in you. And you will realize that the things that you want, truly want for the kingdom and for life and for others, it actually came from Him. And that was just the most wonderful moment, because I remember thinking, it is from God. This is His call. This is His idea. This is His idea, not mine and not ours. And we were turned around at that moment. And from then on, it became a matter of obedience or disobedience.
And there's so much in that is... It's that co-laboring with the Lord, the partnering with Him, where He trusts you while you trust Him, and this beautiful, that dance, that marriage of life in the Spirit, life with God, which is almost, I feel like I've heard with a lot of people who experience similar moments like that. That's the aha moment in your journey where you sort of go to level 2, and you go like, oh, so much of life opens up to me in a really good, healthy, beautiful, deep way that there's so much that we can journey like without being afraid, without, it's just an incredible thing to step into, that realization of like, oh, wow.
Yes, a powerful thing to look back on and to recall from time to time. That's why, looking back is good, and we look back and we look forward. But also, of course, it has to be followed through with more and more of the same. Not that every week when you're overseas you need more confirmation, but you look back at those times and you say, I know I'm supposed to be here, but it's always about keeping that intimacy with Jesus and knowing the desire of God's heart for you now and in the new season and in the next day and that kind of thing.
Wow.
Yeah, exciting. It was a beautiful time. And the funny thing is we literally left New Zealand with a 1-year-old boy, our first boy, and the first grandchild on my wife's side of the family. And that doesn't matter, even if it's the 10th grandchild on any side of the family. When a young couple go and take a baby and a grandchild away from the rest of the family, I only realize now, and I'm not a grandparent, but I only realize now what a huge thing that was for our family and stuff. And we departed in zeal and in hope and in, but that was a big deal, and it is a big deal to go to the other side of the world with a little baby, or just even on your own. It's big, but it was, but God was in it, and we knew it. And when the times are tough, you do lean back on those deep convictions that were confirmed and inspired beyond yourself.
So in heading to Jordan, am I misguided? Is that safe? A safe area? We think of the Middle East, and we see especially what's going on right now. Jordan's close. It's also, just kind of, I guess, talk us through, in terms of, making that decision with your parents, and oh my gosh, kids, it's not just moving country. It's, proverbially moving to a country that might be unsafe, that, unrest and whatnot. But this is also pre 9/11. So what was it?
It is. That's right. You're quite right. It is safe. It was definitely safe. And there are different kinds of safety. Jordan is a relatively calm, peaceful part of the Middle East. Of course, Iraq wouldn't have been, and Afghanistan could have been, but at the time Jordan was. And there are different kinds of safe. The Arab world and the Arab peoples are obviously culturally very, very different. They are tremendously warm, welcoming, hospitable people. And so whilst we see on the news, we see, whatever, events, riots, there were things that went on when we were there. Look, there wouldn't have been a week that went by in all of those years that we were there when there wasn't some kind of serious military event in the region, not in Jordan necessarily, but there were things in Jordan. But it's a country, that's a region of several 100 million people, and stuff very seldom spills over borders. And even within Jordan, there were a few events, terrorism and military things, and you've got all sorts of groups. You've got the Muslim Brotherhood, you've got Hezbollah, you've got lots of different factions in there wrestling for power, and of course you've got Israel in the middle. So there was always something going on, border or around. But it's on the other side of town, and it's small and it's isolated. I remember one day being out with Ange and the boys, and we'd been at a cafe. And we were going home, and the taxi driver said to us, "Oh, we can't go that way. We have to go this way." And he took us to the end of the road, and we could see that there was a protest in the street, and there was a ute at the front of the protest that had camera crew on it, and the camera was pointing back into the street, and all you could see behind the ute was about 200 people. And they were shouting and waving their fists and waving banners, and it was something religious, I think, or about the government and so on, political and religious, as most of those things are.
Right.
And then 200 or 300 people, and we went home and so on. Saw it on the news that night. Well, the camera lens was full of rioters, wasn't it? The camera lens, the news story was terrible. There were lots of people, and it looked like all of Jordan was caught up in a riot. Well, it was one street, about 300 meters square, and that was it. Yeah. And that kind of thing happened a lot. So then our parents would email us or call us and say, "Are you okay?" And we're like, "Seriously, we're fine." In fact, I would honestly say that in most of our years there, I would have been safer walking down the street in Jordan, day or night, than I am in Auckland, Wellington or Christchurch, I'm sure.
Wow.
Yeah, personal safety was better. National military eruption, not so good, but very few people get caught up in that. Yeah.
And would have that personal safety been a similar experience for Andrea?
Her life was a bit different. I think yes, but I would say because because we were trained and because we were there to bless people, not to be tourists, Andrea changed her behaviour, and so as a blonde-haired, tall Western woman, she behaved very modestly. And so she didn't actually wear a headscarf. She didn't have to. That would have been a little bit unusual, in most places. So she wore long sleeves, and she wore clothes that said, I'm a modest religious woman. And that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, yeah.
So I would often go to the airport and pick up new arrivals or tourists or visitors or something, and they'd get off the plane and looking like they'd come from a beach in Europe, and I'd be like, seriously, you have to cover up. That's not fair. That doesn't work here. And then you get the odd person who's trying to exercise their rights to wear what they like. I'm like, no, you're in a different place now. Yeah. So Andrea was careful, and we had a few little incidents, but generally we felt safe and well for the vast majority of our time.
Yeah.
Having lived there and been a part of the culture for, as you said, 7 years, gives you a very deep and beautiful experience and understanding of that culture. And I'm always interested to ask whether that at all changed the way you read the Bible.
Oh, yes.
Understanding, you sort of see a world where Jesus was from, the people that he met with and talked with, he lived there, the Middle East. I'm always interested, did it radically transform the way that you viewed Jesus or the Bible or your faith?
Yes. Yeah, great question. It really did, and it's like, one of those things that's quite hard to describe how, but of course, yes, it is where Jesus lived and walked and moved, and it's not so much because of that, but it's because of the culture of the Bible that we read that comes from that. Then a whole lot of things make sense. And of course, the Arab world is much more simple and developing and a bit basic, many parts of it. Of course, it's somewhat sophisticated, but villages and towns in Jordan and Egypt and Syria, I mean, they really, if it wasn't for the satellite dishes and the telephone cables and stuff, it could be very often almost first century. So it really does, in terms of both the geography, the architecture, flat-roofed houses, people sitting on the roof at night drinking tea in the cool of the evening, the climate, the temperature, those things all come out of Scripture and come out in the Word of God. But also, I think the cultural behaviour of the people, culturally, even though modern day Muslims and modern day Jews and the people of the first century, they do have a lot in common with regard to, like I was saying, about hospitality, generosity, a fairly patriarchal society, the modesty of women. All of these things are alive and well in the Middle East today for the majority of the population. So it really did. It drastically transformed. I mean, I remember reading, as a young Christian, reading about Peter being up on the roof praying in Acts and getting a vision from God. And I'm thinking, and I remember imagining myself on my tin roof in Wellington, sliding off and hurting myself.
Right.
And it's like, and so you get there, and that's what we did. We sat up on the roof drinking tea at night, and it's a beautiful place to think and pray and chat, and it does. It changes. That is the world that it comes in. So, of course, that raises another question and the big, wonderful, big issue of getting some understanding of the culture, because when we read the Bible, we're reading it in the 21st century English world. We are here. And, of course, it was written in the first century in a Middle Eastern Jewish context, and that is different.
So obviously you lived back in New Zealand now for 15 or so years, and you are now currently the Executive Director of FeBC, which is the Far Eastern Broadcasting Company. Yes. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you come to be a part of that organisation?
Yes, interestingly, Far East Broadcasting Company is a global media outreach and discipleship ministry. And when we came back from the Middle East, we came back to work in the national office of our mission, WEC, and we did that for a few years, and then we branched out. Andrea got a job at the university, and I was finishing a master's, and I was looking for a job at the end of that and wondering who on earth's going to employ a returned missionary with a master's in theology and anthropology, and but I loved it and I wanted to do it, and so I was following my heart. I didn't know where it was going to lead. And then FeBC were actually advertising for a new executive director for New Zealand, and I knew of it because I'd seen a visiting speaker, I'd heard a visiting speaker way back in Wellington last century in that church I was telling you about, and that had captured my heart because I like radio and audio and media and sound and stuff. So, yep, I applied and obviously was appointed. And so FeBC is in New Zealand is basically a mobilising and promotion fundraising office for our many, many hundreds of radio stations and media outlets around the world. And so in the West, like New Zealand, Australia and the UK and US, we're fundraising promoters. And in Asia and Africa, our station partners are all the broadcasters. And so they are all nationally owned and operated. We're connected as an international association, and so we contribute largely to their operating and production costs, so that by AM, FM, and then hundreds of digital apps and social media platforms, in fact, every social media platform there is, we're on it in one language or the other. And so across 141 languages at the moment and climbing, we're broadcasting Christian outreach and discipleship programming to the non-English speaking world, almost everywhere.
Wow, that's amazing.
So is there any element of this that's like banned or illegal, or you have to sort of do sneaky things to get around? Like that must be quite the...
Yes, absolutely. Yes, less so today than 30 or 40 years ago. But look, I tell you, one of the places that we broadcast to today that is very resistant is North Korea. And so our Korean brothers and sisters in South Korea are very diligent and very focused on broadcasting faith and hope to the north.
Wow.
So that's very banned. Well, it's as banned as the regime in the north can ban it. So we have two huge, powerful AM transmitters in the south that are pointed permanently to the north. There are numerous stations, FM and AM, for the south, for the southern people, but two are dedicated to the north. We cover North Korea with Christian broadcasting.
Wow.
And of course it's catered for them.
Yeah.
And our southern broadcasters know what the north needs. In fact, the hosts on the program are northern defectors.
Wow.
So they're North Koreans who've come out, who've come to the south, who are refugees essentially in their own continent, their own peninsula, I should say, and then we train them and they become broadcasters, and so they know who they're talking to and they know how to say it and what to say, and so the north does try and block, and so we just have to keep moving our signals and stuff. But we're also here's the other exciting and interesting thing: you're not allowed to own a radio in the north that isn't fixed to the government's programs. Wow. So radios in North Korea are forbidden unless they are a fixed frequency receiver. So we smuggle radios in from the south to the north. And we actually sell those radios, and the very same ones in New Zealand, because they're a little handheld radio that's solar powered and wind-up powered.
Wow.
Yes.
And it has a little torch on it as well, a little LED torch. So it's a perfect emergency radio.
Yeah, brilliant.
But in North Korea, you don't have easy access to batteries and so on, and it can take them anyway. But it'll go till Jesus comes back, because it's powered by the sun or the wind. So we smuggle those in under helium balloons. And so every few months, and this is the South Koreans for you, they are most amazing and devoted people for this. They gather every few months on the border, and lots of different Christian groups do this. In fact, lots of different groups do this, including political groups and so on. And then they build little care packages that are lightweight, so radio and some rice and some little bits and pieces, some chocolate bars and things like that. And then they bundle them up under a balloon, which is about just over 1 metre in diameter, fill it with helium, and when the wind is blowing north, they let them go. And of course, it's quite a big border, and people say, oh, won't they get shot down? Well, you'll be surprised at how hard it is to shoot down a 1 metre balloon floating up in the sky at night.
Yeah.
So then these balloons literally float up in the sky, and in due time, the helium and everything, they diminish and fall down. And enough of them land on the land to be found. And so we know that it works, because defectors come out and tell us, we got your radios, we got your rice, we got your chocolate bars.
That is amazing.
It's incredible.
And so that's going on. And again, how people get out is amazing, but they do. And so that's a good example of a very banned broadcast environment, which requires both innovation on the broadcasting and in the delivery of devices. And that's just one. Going back to the very beginning with all of those references and that growing call to reach the nations. I was reading Revelation this morning, Revelation 15, and there's all those songs through Revelation, amazing songs in Revelation. I hadn't thought of them quite so much before. And it struck me that the writer, John, says in the Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb in chapter 15, God will be worshipped. And it's such an emphatic statement. He will, and we're part of making that, because it says further on, he will be worshipped. And who will not revere him and who will not fear him? All peoples will eventually see and bow and acknowledge, because he has been revealed. We're part of the revelation. The church is part of the revelation of God. The ministries that we do, the things we say, the speaking, the life, the giving, the generosity, the care, it's part of the revelation of God. And it's just great. Like you say, it's great to be part of it. It's an exciting life.
That's a wrap for this week's Sunday Lunch.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Until next time,
Ka
Ka
kite
kite
anō.
anō.